Joining us now to break down the threats posed to the country and what we can do to combat them is Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan. So, Commissioner, I'm really glad to have you on today because we've talked on this program before about how a lot of the things that come back to China are things that actually affect everyday Americans. Most recently, it's the coronavirus pandemic. Before that, it was the trade imbalances, the practices, and we can even talk about human rights abuses. But for the time being, I want to focus on the issues that really affect the American people. I know that your agency and the DHS has recently been clamping down on China for some of their actions as well. Can you explain those moves?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on that every American consumer, this impacts them. So CBP has a statutory authority and responsibility to investigate any goods or products coming into the United States, into our United States supply chain made with forced labor. And that's exactly what we've done. This past week, we introduced 5 more, we call them WROs, withhold and release orders, for entities that we believed are using forced labor to produce products that are making their way to the U.S. border. This is absolutely a tremendous step towards eliminating the human rights violations sponsored by the Chinese government.
And I think that very response, too, sheds light on an issue about China's really expanding reach and how it really affects Americans here at home. Because, yes, we are talking about forced labor, and I'll call them re-education camps, but some people will go as far to call them concentration camps that are taking place in China against the Uyghur people as well. So when it comes to human rights abuses and then the actions that we can apply against China, it's interesting to me that it still overlaps with a sort of productivity here in the United States, something that China has taken away from the average worker, something that they have used in their own country, whether it's through forced labor or through just really kind of trying to undermine U.S. manufacturing. It's affected the average person here at home as well. So when we talk about that, is there ample evidence to suggest that China's actions are indeed hurting the average American?
They are, and you're exactly right. Not only from a moral standpoint, I think everybody is on board that using forced labor. I mean, it's modern day slavery. That's exactly what it is. I think everybody's united on board that that's just atrocious. We have to stop that. But what I think the average citizen doesn't realize is that the competitiveness element of this is that one of the major reasons using forced labor is they're able to produce the product cheaper and faster. That goes directly against the competitiveness against American companies and American workers here in this country. There's absolutely a direct cause and effect. So it's well beyond just the moral aspect, but it has a direct economic aspect and jobs in this country as well.
I would even argue that the two go hand in hand to some degree. I mean, I think that we should look at them in a vacuum because what's happening to the Uyghur people is unconscionable. It's something that everybody around the world should stand up to. And of course, China will tell you that it doesn't exist, that these things aren't happening right now. But I mean, we've seen drone footage. We've seen firsthand accounts of people coming out of the country admitting that this is going on right now. But I think that when we look at everything in its totality, and I think we should look at everything in their isolated incidents in order to address them appropriately, but the Uyghur people, the trade practices that we've talked about, the stealing of intellectual property, the pegging of the Chinese currency to the U.S. currency, and now, of course, most recently, the coronavirus pandemic. And that is something that, once again, I think everybody around the world can get on board with holding China accountable. But when it comes to the United States, what tools do we have under our repertoire in order to really hold them accountable for their response to the beginning days of this pandemic?
So, look, it really goes across the element. You know, CBP, we've got our lane that we have statutory authority. But, look, the United States government as a whole has a wide depth and breadth of tools available to them, whether it's intellectual property or whether it's forced labor. So it really is a United States government approach. I'll give you an example real quick. So it was this July that the Department of Homeland Security, of Trade, of Commerce, and Department of State issued an a business advisory warning to all U.S. businesses and importers that are importing goods about the Xinjiang region and the human rights violations that are going on. So, look, again, this really is a whole of government approach reaching across all departments to really hold China accountable for its criminal activity and the atrocities with respect to forced labor.
And I do want to build on that cooperation. So say, for example, I remember there were allegations that a lot of fentanyl in the country was coming from China, maybe not necessarily directly to the United States, but oftentimes to Mexico and then smuggled over the border into the United States. So using that as an example, can you tie different issues, for example, such as that one, and holding China accountable when it comes to something that may be under the umbrella of your agency, and then cooperate, for example, from maybe another agency and say, listen, China is continuing to pump fentanyl into U.S. markets indirectly. Can we hold them accountable through perhaps a different organization or a different agency and bring those two things together? Or does it not work that way?
Well, we can. No, it does. And you're spot on. Again, looking at all the tools from regulatory issues to criminal issues to sanctions as well. And I'll give you an example. ONDCP, the drug czar, Jim Carroll. We've worked with him and ONDCP to work with China to get certain drugs on a schedule to make them actually illegal. And we've seen a dramatic decrease in using international mail and express consignment to ship fentanyl and other precursor chemicals through those avenues. Now, we're seeing China use other avenues and send those precursors to Mexico. But when we utilize the whole of government approach, it has an impact.
And that's good to hear, too, because that's something that we hear from people within this administration is that whether we're talking about the efforts to secure our border, efforts to really prevent drugs from circulating throughout the country, there does seem to be a little bit more of a coordinated response. In fact, one of our reporters the other day saw a drug bust where they brought in all the materials in a port right here by San Diego, and they were saying that very same thing, that it was an effort of a coordinated type of objective by the different agencies in this country. So it's good news to hear there. And before I let you go, too, I do want to ask about something that overlaps with this issue before as well. Of course, we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, but right before this, a big issue that a lot of people were talking about was the southern border. There was, in fact, a national emergency declared at the southern border, something about 100,000 illegal people crossing every single day from that border. But then it stopped as soon as the coronavirus pandemic started, and the two sides were able to agree that perhaps it is good to close the border during a pandemic such as this. So when it comes to that front, is there still an ongoing crisis at the southern border, or has some progress actually been made?
Well, incredible progress has been made. And look, this is from a law enforcement perspective. This isn't political. This president and this administration, pre-COVID, they gave us the tools, the network of policies and initiatives to really attack the crisis. Again, this time last year, we were having, over 140,000 a month trying to illegally enter. Prior to COVID, we had reduced that flow by 75%. Wow. It was tremendous success, tremendous progress. And now that we have COVID, so we're not closing the border, but what we have is we actually have the statutory tools that this president has given us to be able to actually stop COVID from being further introduced into this country. And this goes back to what we've been asking Congress to do. If they could pass meaningful legislation to give us the tools to address the crisis, it works. And right now, we're actually using CDC's authority to those that are illegally entering right now from a public health standpoint to immediately turn them around most of them within 2 hours instead of introducing them to the country. It's been a game changer. When we have the tools, we can address the threat.
That's fascinating. And I think that even what you're doing right now and the very facts that you just laid out shows that it could be done at the southern border. And we talk about what China did to this country, but I mean, we can't ignore the fact that what illegal immigration has done to this country as well. I mean, it takes away jobs from many people. Right. Sometimes it does result in direct violence. It is an issue that affects a lot of people, more so than just on the border of Texas, Arizona, wherever you want to pick that state. There is a lot more to it. So I think you're exactly right to focus on that and show that there is a chance that progress could be made if the two sides just come together. I think it's a very interesting development. But CBP Commissioner Mark Morgan.
Well,
go ahead. Go ahead.
If I could, real quick to add, you're spot on, as that's what I would say. Every town, a state and city is a border town, city and state, because what happens in the southwest border makes its way into every city across this country. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. I mean, we hear stories all the time about a tragic situation taking place in Iowa, San Francisco. It's not just at the border. So I think that a lot of Americans are waking up to that idea, too, that it affects them from a security standpoint and also from an economic standpoint as well. But Commissioner Mark Morgan, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.